The snow fell heavy that Christmas Eve, blanketing the small town of Millfield in a deceptive peace. Sarah Mitchell clutched her 3-year-old daughter Emma closer as she stood outside the emergency room doors, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The automatic doors swooshed open and closed as medical personnel rushed in and out, but Sarah remained frozen, unable to take that final step inside. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of the decision she was about to make. Emma's fever had been climbing for hours, and the little girl's breathing had become labored. Sarah knew she needed medical attention, but walking through those doors meant facing questions she couldn't answer, forms she couldn't fill out, and bills she couldn't pay. 3 blocks away, Master Sergeant Marcus Ghost Rodriguez was experiencing his own kind of hell. The former Navy SEAL sniper sat in his cramped studio apartment, staring at the bronze star medal that lay on his coffee table next to an empty bottle of whiskey. Christmas lights blinked erratically from the apartment building across the street, casting colorful shadows on his bare walls. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had defined his life for the past 15 years. Marcus had returned from his final deployment 6 months ago, carrying invisible wounds that ran deeper than any physical scar. The transition to civilian life had been brutal. The job interviews where his military experience was seen as a liability rather than an asset. The sleepless nights where every car backfire sent him diving for cover. The growing distance from friends and family who couldn't understand why he wasn't the same man who had left. His phone buzzed on the table. Another missed call from his sister Linda. She'd been trying to reach him all week, probably wanting to invite him for Christmas dinner with her family. Marcus couldn't bear the thought of sitting around a table, pretending to be normal while children laughed and played, reminding him of all the children he couldn't save overseas. He let the call go to voicemail. Back at the hospital, Sarah's resolve was crumbling. Emma's small body felt increasingly warm against her chest, and the little girl's whimpers were getting weaker. A nurse noticed them through the glass doors and stepped outside. "Ma'am, is everything all right? Do you need help?" The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, approached them slowly. Sarah's voice caught in her throat. "My daughter, she's sick. Very sick. But She couldn't finish the sentence. How could she explain that she had no insurance, no money, and nowhere else to turn? How could she admit that she'd been sleeping in her car with Emma for the past week after being evicted from their apartment? The nurse, whose name tag read Janet, gently guided them toward the entrance. "Let's get her inside where it's warm. We'll figure everything else out later." As they entered the hospital, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. She was doing the right thing for Emma, but she knew this decision would change everything. The antiseptic smell of the hospital brought back memories of her own childhood. Endless visits to emergency rooms with her alcoholic mother, social workers asking too many questions, the eventual placement in foster care that had shaped her determination to never let Emma experience the same abandonment. Meanwhile, Marcus had given up on sleep entirely. The combination of alcohol and memories made rest impossible. He pulled on his jacket and stepped out into the snowy night, his feet carrying him on a familiar route through the quiet streets. Walking helped sometimes, the rhythm and movement providing a temporary escape from the thoughts that plagued him. He found himself outside St. Mary's Catholic Church, where Christmas Eve service had just ended. Families emerged from the warm glow inside, children excited about Santa's upcoming visit, parents carrying sleeping toddlers bundled in winter coats. Marcus watched from the shadows, feeling like a ghost observing a world he no longer belonged to. Father Miguel, an elderly priest who had served the community for over 30 years, noticed the solitary figure standing in the snow. He approached slowly, recognizing the haunted look of a man at war with himself. "Cold night to be standing alone," Father Miguel said softly, his breath visible in the frigid air. Marcus turned, surprised he'd been noticed. "Sorry, Father. I didn't mean to lurk. I'll move along. No need to apologize. Sometimes we all need a moment to think. I'm Miguel." The priest extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Marcus shook it. Marcus. Marcus Rodriguez. Rodriguez. Are you related to Maria Rodriguez who used to clean the church? Beautiful woman. Passed about 5 years ago. Marcus felt his throat tighten. She was my mother. Father Miguel's face softened with recognition and sympathy. She spoke of you often. So proud of her son serving his country. She prayed for you every single day. The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. His mother had died while he was deployed, and he'd missed the funeral. Another regret to add to the growing pile that threatened to crush him. She shouldn't have been proud, he said quietly. I've done things that would have broken her heart. At the hospital, Emma had been admitted to the pediatric ward. The doctors determined she had pneumonia, and while it was serious, it was treatable. Sarah sat beside the small bed, holding her daughter's hand as 4 fluids and antibiotics began their work. The relief of seeing Emma's breathing improve was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by anxiety about what would happen next. Dr. Patricia Chun, the attending pediatrician, pulled up a chair beside Sarah. She was young but experienced, with the kind of calm presence that had comforted thousands of worried parents over the years. Emma is going to be fine, Dr. Chin said. The pneumonia caught early, and she's responding well to treatment. But I do have some concerns. Sarah's heart rate spiked. What kind of concerns? Emma shows signs of prolonged stress and poor nutrition. Her weight is below normal for her age, and she has some developmental delays that suggest inconsistent care. Dr. Chin's voice was gentle but professional. I need to understand her living situation. The moment Sarah had been dreading had arrived. She looked at her daughter's peaceful face. Finally, relaxed in sleep for the first time in days. We've been between homes. It's temporary. Dr. Chen had heard this euphemism countless times. Between homes usually meant homeless. Do you have family support? Anyone who can help? Sarah shook her head. Her parents had died in a car accident when Emma was just 6 months old, and she'd been an only child. Emma's father had disappeared the moment he learned about the pregnancy, leaving no forwarding address or contact information. They were truly alone in the world. I work, Sarah said defensively. I have 2 jobs, but daycare is expensive, and when Emma gets sick, I have to choose between taking care of her and keeping my job. Last month, I missed too many days and got fired from one of them. Then, I couldn't make rent. The story was familiar to Dr. Chun, who had seen the cycle repeat countless times. Single mothers working multiple low-wage jobs, one emergency away from disaster. What's your other job? I clean office buildings at night. But I have to bring Emma with me because I can't afford a babysitter. Sarah's voice cracked. I know it's not ideal, but I'm doing my best. Dr. Chun felt the familiar weight of these conversations. As a doctor, her priority was Emma's health and safety. As a human being, she understood the impossible choices Sarah faced. I need to be honest with you. Based on what I've seen and what you've told me, I'm required to contact Child Protective Services. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. No, please. I can figure this out. I just need a little time. Emma needs me. I understand how scary this sounds, but CPS isn't necessarily about taking children away. Often, they can help connect families with resources, housing assistance, job training, childcare support. But Sarah had grown up in the system. She knew the reality behind the reassuring words. Once CPS got involved, parents lost control. Bureaucrats made decisions about families they'd never met, and children disappeared into a maze of foster homes and group facilities. She'd experienced it firsthand, and she'd sworn it would never happen to Emma. Back on the snowy streets, Marcus found himself walking toward the hospital district without conscious intention. His conversation with Father Miguel had stirred up emotions he'd been trying to bury. His mother's faith had been unwavering, even when life had dealt her difficult hands. She'd raised him and his sister alone after their father abandoned them, working 3 jobs to keep food on the table and never once complaining about the sacrifices. As he turned the corner onto Medical Center Drive, he noticed commotion in the hospital parking lot. Police cars and an ambulance were parked near the emergency entrance, their red and blue lights painting the snow in star colors. His military training kicked in automatically, assessing the situation for potential threats or opportunities to help. A woman burst through the hospital doors, running toward the parking lot. Even in the dim light, Marcus could see her desperation. She was young, probably mid-20s, with long brown hair escaping from a hasty ponytail. She clutched a small pink backpack and kept looking over her shoulder as if being pursued. Hospital security guards followed her outside, speaking into radios and scanning the area. Marcus recognized the signs of someone trying to escape something, the quick, purposeful movements, the constant awareness of surroundings, the barely controlled panic. He'd seen it in war zones when civilians try to flee combat areas. The woman stopped near a beat-up sedan, fumbling with keys as tears streamed down her face. Marcus found himself moving closer, his protective instincts overriding his desire to remain invisible. As he approached, he could hear her crying and talking to herself. "I can't let them take her. I won't let them take her. She's all I have. She's all I have." Marcus stopped a few feet away, keeping his voice low and non-threatening. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need help?" Sarah spun around, startled by the unexpected voice. Through her tears, she saw a tall man with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a military-style jacket. There was something about his presence that felt solid and trustworthy, even in her panicked state. "They want to take my daughter," she said, the words tumbling out. "She's sick, and I brought her here to get help, but now they want to take her away from me." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He'd seen too many families torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. "Where is she now?" "Inside. She has pneumonia. She's finally getting better, but the doctor called child services." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know how this ends. I lived it. Once they get involved, they don't stop until they've destroyed everything." The security guards were getting closer, and Marcus could see more hospital staff emerging from the building. Whatever was happening, it was escalating quickly. His training told him to gather intelligence before acting. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. And my daughter is Emma. She's 3. I'm Marcus. Marcus Rodriguez." He looked toward the hospital entrance, where the security team was regrouping. "Sarah, if you run now, they'll just call the police. It'll make everything worse." "It's already worse," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "They're going to put her in foster care. They're going to give her to strangers who don't love her." Marcus knew something about being failed by systems that were supposed to protect. The VA had promised to help veterans transition to civilian life, but the reality was a bureaucratic maze that left too many soldiers struggling alone. He'd lost 3 friends to suicide in the past year, all of them casualties of a system that couldn't or wouldn't provide the support they needed. "Maybe there's another way," he heard himself saying. "Maybe we can figure something out." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." It was a fair question, and Marcus wasn't sure he had a good answer. Maybe it was because he recognized the look of someone fighting a battle they couldn't win alone. Maybe it was because his mother had taught him to help people when he could. Maybe it was because helping Sarah and Emma might give his life some purpose again. "Because everyone deserves someone in their corner," he said simply. The hospital doors opened again, and Dr. Chun emerged with a social worker and 2 police officers. Sarah's panic returned in full force, but Marcus stepped slightly in front of her, his presence creating a small buffer. "Let's go talk to them," he said quietly. "Running won't solve anything, but maybe we can change the conversation." Sarah looked at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere on the worst night of her life. Something in his steady voice and calm demeanor made her want to trust him, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. As they walked back toward the hospital entrance together, neither of them knew that this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. Marcus would discover that protecting Sarah and Emma gave him the mission he'd been searching for since returning home. Sarah would learn that sometimes help came from the most unexpected places, and that not all battles had to be fought alone. The snow continued to fall as they approached the group of officials, each flake catching the hospital lights like tiny stars against the darkness. Whatever happened next, Christmas Eve 2023 would be remembered as the night two broken people found exactly what they needed in each other's fight. Dr. Chin's expression shifted from concern to surprise as she saw Sarah returning with the tall stranger beside her. The social worker, a tired-looking woman in her 40s named Helen Santos, clutched a clipboard and wore the expression of someone who had worked too many holiday shifts dealing with family crises. "Ms. Mitchell," Dr. Chin called out as they approached. "We were worried when you left so suddenly." Marcus could feel the tension radiating from Sarah, but she stopped walking and faced the group. "I needed some air," she said, her voice barely steady. Helen Santos stepped forward, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm Helen from Child Protective Services. I understand you have some concerns about our involvement, but I want you to know that our primary goal is keeping families together while ensuring children's safety." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "I've heard that before. Right before they placed me with a family who locked me in the basement when I misbehaved." The comment hung heavy in the cold air. Marcus saw the police officers exchange glances, their hands moving closer to their radios. He recognized the signs of a situation about to spiral out of control. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, stepping forward, "we need you to come back inside so we can sort this out." Marcus moved slightly, positioning himself where he could see everyone clearly. "What exactly needs to be sorted out?" His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command situations. Helen Santos sized up this new player in the drama. "I'm sorry, but this is a family matter." "Are you a relative?" "I'm a friend," Marcus replied simply. "And I'm wondering what crime has been committed here that requires police presence." Dr. Chun intervened before the situation could escalate further. "No crime has been committed. We called CPS because we're concerned about Emma's welfare, and security called the police when Ms. Mitchell left unexpectedly." "She stepped outside for air," Marcus said. "She's been sitting in a hospital room watching her sick daughter for hours. That doesn't seem unreasonable." Helen Santos wasn't used to being challenged, especially by civilians who didn't understand the complexities of child welfare cases. "Mr. Rodriguez." "Mr. Rodriguez, I appreciate your concern, but there are protocol issues here. Emma shows signs of neglect, and Ms. Mitchell has admitted to being homeless. We have a duty to ensure the child's safety." Sarah's control finally snapped. "Neglect? I've given everything I have for my daughter. Every meal she's eaten in the past 3 years came before mine. Every dollar I've earned has gone to keeping her safe and fed and clothed. How is that neglect?" Her voice echoed off the hospital walls, raw with months of suppressed pain and frustration. "You want to know about neglect? Neglect is taking a child away from the only person who loves her and putting her with strangers who get paid to pretend they care." Marcus watched the faces around them. The police officers looked uncomfortable, caught between duty and sympathy. Dr. Chin seemed conflicted, clearly understanding both perspectives. Helen Santos remained impassive, but Marcus detected a flicker of something, maybe recognition, maybe regret, in her eyes. "Sarah," Dr. Chun said softly, "no one is questioning your love for Emma, but love isn't always enough to keep a child safe. She needs stability, regular medical care, proper nutrition. All things I was providing until the system failed me," Sarah shot back. "I had a job, an apartment, health insurance through my employer. Then Emma got sick, and I had to miss work to take care of her. They fired me for attendance issues. Without income, I couldn't pay rent. Without a permanent address, I couldn't get another job. It's a trap designed to destroy families." Marcus had heard similar stories from fellow veterans who'd found themselves homeless after struggling with PTSD and addiction. The system that was supposed to help often became another obstacle to overcome. "What would it take to resolve this situation?" he asked Helen Santos directly. The social worker consulted her clipboard. "Emma needs stable housing, consistent care, and regular access to medical services. Ms. Mitchell needs to demonstrate she can provide these things." "How can she demonstrate?" that if you remove the child, Marcus pressed, seems like you're creating the very problem you're claiming to solve. Helen Santos had been doing this job for 12 years, and she'd learned to separate her emotions from her duties. Children's safety had to come first, even when the system itself was flawed. There are programs available to help families in crisis, but they take time to implement. In the meantime, Emma needs immediate stability. What kind of programs? Sarah asked, grasping for any alternative to losing her daughter. Emergency housing assistance, job training, childcare support. But there are waiting lists, and the process can take weeks or months. We can't leave a sick child in an unstable situation while bureaucracy runs its course. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd seen this same pattern overseas. Well-intentioned people making decisions based on regulations rather than reality, creating more problems than they solved. What if the housing situation could be resolved immediately? Everyone turned to look at him. Helen Santos raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Marcus wasn't entirely sure what he meant. The words had come out of his mouth before his brain had fully processed the implications. But once spoken, the idea began to take shape. I mean, what if Sarah and Emma had a safe, stable place to stay while she gets back on her feet? Sarah stared at him in confusion. Marcus, what are you talking about? He looked at her, seeing his mother's desperation from decades ago when she'd struggled to keep their family together. I have an apartment. It's not much, but it's clean and warm and safe. There's a pull-out couch in the living room. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge to everything conventional wisdom said about strangers and trust and proper procedures. Helen Santos looked skeptical. Dr. Chin seemed intrigued but concerned. The police officers waited to see how this unusual negotiation would resolve. Mr. Rodriguez, Helen Santos said carefully, while I appreciate the gesture, we can't simply place a vulnerable family with someone we know nothing about. Then, get to know something about me, Marcus replied. He pulled out his wallet and extracted his military ID. Master Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, Navy SEALs. 15 years of service, honorable discharge 6 months ago. No criminal record, no history of violence against civilians, top-level security clearance. He handed the ID to Helen Santos, who examined it carefully. Military service is commendable, but it doesn't automatically qualify someone to provide emergency housing for an at-risk family. What does qualify someone? Marcus asked. A foster care system that's overwhelmed and underfunded? Group homes where kids age out without ever experiencing real family? Or maybe someone who understands what it's like to fight for something that matters. Sarah watched this exchange with growing amazement. This stranger was literally putting his life on the line for her, and Emma, arguing with authorities, offering his home to people he'd met less than an hour ago. It defied every lesson she'd learned about trusting others and protecting herself. Dr. Chun stepped into the conversation. Helen, what if we approach this differently? Emma needs monitoring for the next 48 hours anyway. What if we set up a home health check system? I could arrange for a visiting nurse to check on her daily, and we could schedule follow-up appointments to track her recovery. Helen Santos considered this. Home health programs were legitimate alternatives to hospitalization, and they provided built-in oversight. That might work, but I need references from Mr. Rodriguez, a home inspection, and agreement to ongoing supervision. Marcus pulled out his phone. I can give you references right now. My commanding officer, my neighbor, my sister, who's a teacher. He scrolled through his contacts. You want character references? I can provide a dozen military personnel who served with me, plus civilian employers for my job search. It's not just about character, Helen Santos explained. It's about training, experience with children, understanding of trauma-informed care. I've had extensive trauma training, Marcus interrupted. Combat médic certification, crisis intervention, de-escalation technique. I've worked with traumatized civilians in war zones, including children separated from their families. Sarah found her voice. Why are you doing this? Why would you complicate your life for strangers? Marcus looked at her directly. Because I know what it's like when the system fails you. Because I've seen what happens to kids who get lost in bureaucracy. Because he paused, struggling to articulate feelings he'd been avoiding for months. Because maybe helping you helped me figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life now that the war is over. The honesty in his voice seemed to shift something in the group dynamics. Helen Santos lowered her clipboard. Dr. Chun moved closer, her medical instincts recognizing someone in pain. Even the police officers relaxed slightly. There's something else, Marcus continued. I'm not suggesting this as a permanent solution. I'm suggesting it as a bridge, a way to keep Emma safe while Sarah rebuilds. With stable housing, she can look for work, establish routines, prove she can provide what Emma needs. Helen Santos had seen a lot of creative solutions over the years, some successful, many not. But there was something about this situation that felt different. Maybe it was the obvious desperation in Sarah's eyes, or the unexpected intervention of a veteran clearly struggling with his own demons, or simply the fact that it was Christmas Eve and everyone was tired of bureaucratic battles. I need to make some calls, she said finally. Check references, consult with my supervisor, arrange for emergency home inspection. She looked at her watch. It's almost midnight on Christmas Eve. Most people aren't available until after the holiday. Then, what happens to Emma in the meantime? Sarah asked. Dr. Chun had been thinking about this problem. She could stay in the hospital for observation until Monday. Her pneumonia is improving, but we could justify keeping her for monitoring. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it bought time. Sarah would be able to stay with Emma, and the CPS investigation could proceed through proper channels. Marcus would have a couple of days to prepare his apartment and figure out what he'd gotten himself into. I have conditions, Helen Santos said. Random check-ins, scheduled home visits, mandatory counseling for both adults, and immediate removal if any concern arise. Sarah nodded quickly. Whatever you need. I just want my daughter to be safe and healthy. Marcus felt a familiar weight settling on his shoulders, the weight of mission responsibility. He'd volunteered for countless dangerous operations over the years, but none had felt as important as this. I understand the conditions. I accept them. As the group moved back toward the hospital entrance, Marcus caught Sarah's arm gently. Are you sure about this? You don't know anything about me either. You'd be putting your daughter at risk with a stranger. Sarah looked at him, this man who had appeared out of nowhere and offered everything with no promise of anything in return. I know you could have walked away when you saw me crying in the parking lot. I know you stood up to police and social workers to defend people you don't owe anything to. I know you offered your home without asking for anything back. She paused, and I know Emma needs stability more than I need to control every variable. They walked back into the hospital together, an unlikely alliance formed in crisis and hope. Helen Santos was already making calls, starting the emergency approval process. Dr. Chun was planning the medical oversight that would keep Emma safe. The police officers were filing reports about a situation that had resolved without arrests or tragedy. But Marcus and Sarah were thinking about the morning, about explaining to a 3-year-old that they were going to stay with a new friend for a while, about building trust between strangers, about the possibility that sometimes the system could be made to work for families instead of against them. As they rode the elevator back to the pediatric ward, Sarah realized she hadn't asked Marcus the most basic questions about his life. She didn't know if he was married, if he had children, what his apartment looked like, or why he'd been walking alone through the snow on Christmas Eve. Marcus, she said quietly, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you have family? Kids? A wife? He was quiet for a moment. No wife. No kids. My sister lives across the country with her family. My mother passed away 5 years ago. He looked at the elevator numbers climbing. I've been pretty much alone since I got back from deployment. The elevator dinged softly as they reached the pediatric floor. Then, maybe, Sarah said, we can help each other figure out how not to be alone anymore. Marcus looked at her, this young mother who had every reason to trust no one and every excuse to give up, yet was still fighting for her daughter and somehow finding room to worry about his loneliness. Yeah, he said quietly. Maybe we can. The doors opened to reveal the brightly lit hallway of the children's ward, where nurses moved quietly between rooms full of sick kids and worried parents. Somewhere in that maze of medical equipment and healing, Emma was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her life was about to change in ways that might save them all. Christmas morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the hospital room windows. Emma had slept peacefully through the night, her breathing steady and clear for the first time in days. Sarah dozed fitfully in the chair beside her bed, exhaustion finally overcoming anxiety. Marcus had spent the night in the waiting room, refusing Sarah's suggestions that he go home and return later. When Emma woke up, she was confused by her surroundings, but delighted to see her mother close by. "Mama, where are we?" she asked in her small, scratchy voice. "We're at the hospital, sweetheart. You were sick, but the doctors made you feel better." Sarah smoothed Emma's hair back from her forehead, checking for fever out of habit. Emma noticed Marcus standing near the window and studied him with the frank curiosity of a 3-year-old. "Who is that man, Mama?" "That's Mr. Marcus. He's a friend who's going to help us for a while." Marcus approached slowly, remembering the child interaction training he'd received for overseas missions. "Hi, Emma. I'm glad you're feeling better." Emma considered this gravely. "Are you a soldier? You stand like the soldiers on TV." The observation surprised Marcus. He hadn't realized his military posture was so obvious, even to a child. "I was a soldier. Now I'm not. Now I help people when they need it. Like a superhero?" Marcus almost smiled. "Something like that." Dr. Chen arrived for morning rounds, pleased to find Emma alert and interactive. Her temperature was normal, her breathing clear, and her appetite was returning. "She's responding beautifully to treatment. I think we can discharge her this afternoon." The words brought both relief and renewed anxiety. Sarah knew they were moving toward the next phase of their uncertain situation. Helen Santos had called early that morning to confirm that Marcus's references had checked out and that emergency approval had been granted for temporary placement. A home health nurse would visit daily, and formal evaluations would begin after the holiday weekend. "Dr. Chun," Sarah asked, "what should I watch for at home? What if she gets worse?" The doctor sat down, recognizing the anxiety of a parent who had already been through too much. "The antibiotic should continue to clear the infection. Watch for fever returning, difficulty breathing, or changes in appetite. But honestly, what she needs most now is rest, proper nutrition, and a stable environment." After Dr. Chen left, Marcus pulled Sarah aside. "We should talk about logistics before we leave here. Ground rules, expectations, that sort of thing." They found a quiet corner of the family lounge, where Christmas decorations seemed both festive and sad in the institutional setting. Marcus had been thinking about this conversation all night, trying to anticipate problems and solutions. "First," he said, "I want you to know that you and Emma can leave anytime you want. This isn't a trap or a commitment. It's just a safe place to figure things out." Sarah nodded, though she was beginning to understand that leaving might be more complicated than Marcus realized. "What about you? What if you change your mind? What if having strangers in your space becomes too much? Then we'll figure something else out. But I won't leave you hanging. I give you my word on that." It was a military promise, Sarah realized. The kind of commitment that meant something to people who had learned to depend on each other in life and death situations. "What does your apartment look like? Is it child safe?" Marcus tried to picture his sparse living space through a parent's eyes. "It's small. 1 bedroom, living room, kitchen. I sleep on the couch anyway, so you and Emma can have a bedroom. I'll need to pick up some things, child-proofing stuff, maybe a few toys. I don't exactly have a family-friendly environment set up. Marcus, you don't need to buy things for us. We have some belongings in storage." Sarah's voice trailed off as she realized the complexity of their situation. "Actually, I'm not sure what we have anymore. When I couldn't pay the storage fee last month, they might have auctioned everything." The casual mention of another loss hit Marcus harder than he expected. Sarah had been managing disaster after disaster, each one stripping away another piece of normal life. "We'll figure it out. Basic needs first, then we'll see what else Emma requires." A new voice interrupted their planning. "Excuse me, are you Ms. Mitchell?" They turned to see a young woman in scrubs with a visitor's badge. She had kind eyes and carried a large canvas bag. "I'm Rachel Morrison from the hospital's Family Services Department. Dr. Chen asked me to stop by." Sarah tensed automatically. In her experience, additional social workers meant additional problems. But Rachel's approach felt different, warmer, less official. "I understand you're going through a housing transition," Rachel continued. "I work with families who need emergency support, and I thought I could help with some basics." She opened her bag to reveal children's clothes in Emma's size, toiletries, a few small toys, and even some basic groceries. "These are donations from our emergency family fund. Most people don't realize how many families face temporary crises that spiral out of control." Sarah felt tears threaten again. Kindness from strangers had become unexpected and overwhelming. "Thank you. That's incredibly generous." Rachel handed her a business card. "I also have information about local resources, job training programs, childcare assistance, housing support. Nothing that will solve everything immediately, but tools to help you rebuild." Marcus watched this interaction with interest. Rachel's approach reminded him of the community support networks he'd seen in effective military units. Practical help combined with respect for dignity. "Rachel," he said, "I'm Marcus Rodriguez. I'm providing temporary housing for Sarah and Emma. Are there resources for people like me? Support for the support system?" Rachel studied him with professional interest. "Actually, yes. There are programs for people who provide informal family assistance. Training, support groups, even some financial help for expenses." "Are you family?" "No, just someone who wants to help. That's actually more common than people think. Community support networks often include non-relatives who step up during crises." She pulled another card from her bag. "This program trains and supports volunteer family advocates. Might be useful." After Rachel left, Sarah and Marcus returned to Emma's room to find her coloring in a book a nurse had provided. She had drawn what appeared to be 3 figures holding hands: a woman with long hair, a child, and a tall person she had colored in green. "Who did you draw, sweetheart?" Sarah asked. "That's you, Mama, and that's me, and that's Mr. Marcus. He's green because soldiers wear green." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. In Emma's simple drawing, he wasn't a stranger or a complication or a temporary solution. He was part of a unit, a team, a family configuration that made sense to her 3-year-old logic. The discharge process took several hours, involving medication instructions, follow-up appointments, and final consultations with Helen Santos, who arrived to observe the transition. She watched Marcus interact with Emma, noting his careful attention to safety, his patient responses to her questions, and his instinctive protective positioning when hospital staff approached. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said during a private moment, "I need to be clear about something. This arrangement is highly unusual. Most emergency placements involve licensed foster families or relatives. You're essentially an unknown quantity in a volatile situation." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "What would convince you that I'm the right choice for this situation?" Helen Santos had been asking herself the same question. Her training said to minimize risks, follow procedures, trust the system. But her experience had taught her that the system often failed families who needed creative solutions. "Consistency," she said finally. "Emma needs routine, predictability, safety. Sarah needs space to rebuild without additional trauma. Can you provide that while managing your own transition to civilian life?" The question struck to the heart of Marcus's own uncertainties. He'd been struggling to create routine and predictability for himself, let alone for others. But maybe that was exactly what he needed, a mission that required him to build the stability he'd been unable to find alone. "I can," he said. "I will." The car ride to Marcus's apartment was quiet. Emma sat in a borrowed car seat, clutching a small stuffed bear the nurses had given her. Sarah stared out the window at the unfamiliar neighborhood, trying to process how much her life had changed in 18 hours. Marcus's building was older but well-maintained, in a working-class area with small businesses and families. His apartment was on the third floor, and Sarah noticed him automatically scanning the stairwell and hallways as they climbed, old habits from military service. When he opened a door, Sarah's first impression was of intentional emptiness. The apartment was clean and organized, but it felt temporary, like a hotel room rather than a home. The furniture was basic and minimal. There were no personal photos, no decorations, no signs that anyone actually lived there. "It's not much," Marcus said, suddenly seeing his space through their eyes. "But it's safe and warm." Emma walked directly to the large window that looked out over the street. "Look, Mama, I can see cars and people and a dog." The simple joy in her voice reminded Sarah that Emma had been living in a car for weeks, watching the world through windows she couldn't open, unable to run or play or feel secure. This sparse apartment represented luxury in comparison. "It's perfect," Sarah said, and meant it. Marcus showed them around quickly. The bedroom had a double bed with clean sheets. The bathroom had fresh towels. The kitchen was stocked with basic supplies and the groceries Rachel had provided. "I don't cook much," he admitted, "but I can handle simple meals. Eggs, sandwiches, that sort of thing." "I can cook," Sarah offered, "if that's okay. I like cooking." It was such a normal conversation, people negotiating shared domestic space, figuring out routines and responsibilities. But for all three of them, normal felt revolutionary. Emma had discovered Marcus's television and was fascinated by the remote control. "Mr. Marcus, can we watch cartoons?" "Sure." Marcus had no idea what channels carried children's programming, but he was willing to learn. As he flipped through options, he found himself watching Emma's face instead of the screen, noting what made her smile. Sarah unpacked their few belongings in the bedroom, hanging Emma's clothes in half of the closet Marcus had emptied for them. The gesture felt both intimate and practical, strangers sharing living space out of necessity, trying to create something that felt like family. That evening, as Emma played quietly and Sarah prepared a simple dinner from donated groceries, Marcus realized he felt more relaxed than he had in months. The apartment had purpose now. The silence was filled with life instead of echoing with emptiness. "Marcus," Sarah said as they ate dinner together at his small table, "can I ask what you were doing last night? Before you found me in the parking lot." He considered how much truth to share. "Walking. I do that when I can't sleep. Christmas is hard for me. Too many memories, too much time to think." Emma looked up from her plate. "Were you sad?" The direct question from a child demanded a direct answer. "Yeah, sweetheart. I was sad." "Why?" "Because sometimes grown-ups feel sad when they miss people they love." Emma considered this seriously. "I get sad when I miss Mama. But then she comes back and I feel better." "That's exactly right." Sarah watched this exchange with growing understanding. Marcus had been as lost as she was, just in a different way. Maybe Rachel was right that community support networks often included people who needed help as much as they provided it. After dinner, Emma fell asleep on the couch while watching cartoons, exhausted by the day's transitions. Marcus carried her to the bedroom, and Sarah tucked her in, both adults moving with the careful quiet of people who understood how precious a sleeping child was. "Thank you," Sarah said when they returned to the living room, "for all of this. I know it's complicated for you." Marcus was setting up bedding on the couch, creating his new sleeping space. "It's not complicated. It's the first thing that's made sense to me since I got home." They said goodnight awkwardly, strangers sharing space and responsibility and hope. Sarah closed the bedroom door gently, listening to Emma's peaceful breathing. Marcus lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, no longer hearing only his own thoughts in the darkness. For the first time in months, Christmas night brought peace instead of painful memories. Outside, the city settled into holiday quiet. Inside a small apartment, three people who had been alone began the careful work of becoming something like a family. The first week of their new arrangement revealed both unexpected harmonies and inevitable tensions. Emma adapted to Marcus's apartment with the resilience of a child who had learned not to become too attached to any particular space. She created routines quickly, morning cartoons while the adults drank coffee, afternoon coloring sessions at the kitchen table, evening story time before bed. Marcus discovered that having a 3-year-old in his space required constant vigilance of a different kind than military operations. Emma was curious about everything, fearless about exploration, and possessed an apparently unlimited capacity for questions. Within days, she had transformed his sterile environment into something that actually looked lived in. "Mr. Marcus," she said one morning while he attempted to make pancakes, "why don't you have pictures on your walls?" It was a reasonable question from someone whose previous home had been decorated with her artwork and family photos. Marcus looked around his bare walls, trying to see them through her eyes. "I guess I never got around to putting any up," he said. "Mama, and I had lots of pictures. Pictures of when I was a baby, and pictures of Grandma and Grandpa in heaven." Emma's matter-of-fact tone made the loss sound manageable, but Marcus caught the wistfulness underneath. Sarah emerged from a bathroom where she'd been getting ready for a job interview, her third that week. The steady housing situation had allowed her to begin searching for employment, though the process was proving more challenging than expected. "Good morning, sunshine," she said to Emma, then looked at Marcus with appreciation. "Thank you for making breakfast. You didn't have to do that." "I like making breakfast now," Marcus replied, and realized it was true. Cooking for people gave the morning structure and purpose. "How are you feeling about today's interview?" Sarah's expression tightened with familiar anxiety. "It's for a receptionist position at a dental office. The pay is decent, and they offer health insurance after 90 days. But," she hesitated, unwilling to voice her concerns. "But," Marcus prompted gently, "but when they ask about the gap in my employment history, I have to explain about being homeless. When they ask for references from previous employers, I have to admit I was fired for attendance issues. When they run a credit check, they'll see unpaid bills and an eviction." Sarah's voice grew smaller with each admission. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm fooling myself thinking I can dig out of this hole." Marcus had heard similar self-doubt from fellow veterans struggling with civilian employment. The shame spiral was familiar, each rejection confirming negative self-beliefs, each failure making the next attempt feel more hopeless. "You're not fooling yourself," he said firmly. "You're starting over after a crisis. That's different than failing." Emma had been listening with the intense attention children brought to adult conversations they didn't quite understand. "Mama, what's an interview?" "It's when people ask you questions to see if they want to give you a job," Sarah explained. "Like a test. Kind of like a test." Emma considered this seriously. "Mr. Marcus, did you have to take a test to be a soldier?" "Lots of tests," Marcus confirmed. "Physical tests, written tests, tests where people watched everything I did to see if I could handle difficult situations." "Did you pass all your tests?" Marcus looked at this small girl who somehow managed to ask the most important questions. "Most of them. But even when I failed tests, I learned things that helped me pass the next ones." Sarah felt some of her anxiety ease. Marcus had a gift for reframing situations in ways that reduced their emotional charge. It was probably a military skill, staying calm under pressure, finding solutions instead of dwelling on problems. The home health nurse, Patricia Williams, arrived as they were finishing breakfast. She was a woman in her 50s with the efficient warmth of someone who had seen everything and judged nothing. Emma had grown comfortable with these daily visits, treating them like playtime with a friend who happened to check her breathing and temperature. "How's our patient today?" Patricia asked, settling her medical bag on the table. "I feel good," Emma announced. "And I can run really fast now. Want to see?" She demonstrated by running from the kitchen to the living room and back, breathing easily and grinning with accomplishment. Patricia smiled and made notes on her chart. "Excellent recovery," she told Sarah. "Her energy is back. Breathing is clear. No residual symptoms. From a medical standpoint, she's doing beautifully." "What about from other standpoints?" Sarah asked, recognizing that Patricia's observations went beyond physical health. Patricia had been making those broader observations all week. She's adjusting well to the living situation. She seems secure, happy, developing appropriate attachments. She looked at Marcus. You're good with her. Do you have experience with children? Not really. I'm learning as I go. Well, you're learning fast. She trusts you, which says something about your consistency and patience. After Patricia left, Marcus prepared to leave for his own appointment. He'd been meeting weekly with a counselor at the Veterans Affairs office, a requirement he'd initially resented but was beginning to appreciate. Will you be okay until I get back? He asked Sarah. Of course. We'll be fine. But Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety about being alone with Emma in someone else's space, responsible for someone else's belongings, uncertain about boundaries and expectations. Marcus sensed her discomfort. Sarah, this is your home too, for as long as you need it to be. You don't have to ask permission to exist here. His words addressed fears she hadn't articulated. Sarah had been moving through the apartment like a guest, trying to minimize her impact, afraid of overstepping invisible boundaries. At the VA office, Marcus met with Dr. Jennifer Kim, a therapist who specialized in veteran transition issues. She was younger than Marcus had expected when first assigned to her, but her directness and lack of pity had earned his respect. How was your week? She asked as he settled into the familiar chair across from her desk. Different, Marcus said. Good, different, mostly, but complicated. Dr. Kim had been intrigued by Marcus's housing arrangement since he'd mentioned it the previous week. Tell me about the complications. It's not really complications with Sarah and Emma. Marcus searched for words. They're easy to live with. Emma makes me laugh. Sarah is thoughtful about space and routines. But I keep waiting for something to go wrong. What kind of wrong? For them to realize I'm not as stable as I seem. For Sarah to decide she'd rather take her chances with the system than trust me. For Emma to get scared of me when I have nightmares or flashbacks. Marcus paused. For me to let them down the way I let down people overseas. Dr. Kim leaned forward slightly. This was the first time Marcus had directly referenced his combat experiences. What makes you think you let people down overseas? The question opened a door Marcus had been keeping carefully locked. There was a family in Afghanistan. Father, mother, 3 kids. They'd been helping us with intelligence about insurgent movements. We were supposed to relocate them before my unit pulled out, but he stopped, unable to continue. But what happened? Politics, bureaucracy, conflicting orders. The evacuation got delayed, then canceled. We left them behind. Marcus's voice became flat, emotionless. 2 weeks after we left, the Taliban found out they'd been helping us. The father and oldest son were executed publicly. The mother and younger children disappeared. The weight of survivors' guilt filled the room. Dr. Kim had heard similar stories from other veterans, the crushing responsibility of leaving vulnerable people behind. Marcus, you didn't make the decision to leave that family behind. You were following orders in an impossible situation. I could have refused the order. I could have found a way to get them out. I chose to follow protocol instead of doing what was right. And now you're worried about failing Sarah and Emma the same way? The connection was so obvious once spoken aloud that Marcus felt foolish for not seeing it himself. Yeah, I guess I am. What would failing them look like? Marcus considered this. Having a bad episode and scaring Emma. Deciding this is too complicated and backing out. Not being strong enough to help Sarah rebuild her life. Being the reason they end up worse off than before. Those are specific, actionable concerns, Dr. Kim noted, which means we can develop specific strategies to address them. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Sarah's job interview had not gone well. The manager's demeanor had shifted noticeably when Sarah explained her recent employment gap, and the interview had ended with vague promises to be in touch soon. Sarah knew enough about rejection to recognize its polite forms. She returned home feeling defeated, only to find Emma had created an elaborate fort using couch cushions and blankets. Mama, look what I built. It's our castle. Emma's delight was infectious, pulling Sarah out of her disappointment. They spent the afternoon playing in the pillow fort, reading stories, and pretending to be princesses defending their kingdom from imaginary dragons. When Marcus returned from his appointment, he found them both napping in the makeshift fort, Sarah's arm around Emma, both looking peaceful and safe. The sight hit him with unexpected emotion. This was what families looked like. Not perfect, not conventional, but caring and present and committed to each other's well-being. He began preparing dinner quietly, letting them sleep. When Sarah woke up, she found him in the kitchen making spaghetti. Emma is still sleeping contentedly among the pillows. "How did the interview go?" he asked without looking up from the stove. "Awful," Sarah said honestly. "I could see them writing me off the moment I mentioned being homeless. It doesn't matter that I have good work experience, and references from before my life fell apart. The recent stuff overshadows everything else." Marcus turned to face her. "What kind of word do you want to do? Not what's available or what you think you can get, but what would make you excited to get up in the morning?" The question surprised Sarah. No one had asked her about her dreams in so long that she'd almost forgotten she had any. "I used to want to work with families. Social work? Maybe, or family advocacy. I thought about going back to school for a degree in family services." "What stopped you?" "Life. Pregnancy. Bills. Survival." Sarah sat down at the kitchen table. "It's hard to think about long-term goals when you're not sure where you'll sleep next week." Marcus served dinner, creating a normal evening routine that was becoming precious to all of them. "What if we made a plan? Not just for immediate stability, but for building toward what you actually want." "Marcus, I can't ask you to support us indefinitely while I go to school. That's not fair to you." "You're not asking. I am suggesting. And maybe it's exactly what I need too." Emma woke up from her nap and joined them for dinner, chattering about her fort and demanding that Marcus come see it properly. After dinner, the three of them sat in the pillow fort reading stories, and Marcus realized he was building something he hadn't known he wanted, a sense of home that had nothing to do with military structure or regulations or duty, and everything to do with choosing to care about people who needed him to be reliable. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah and Marcus sat at the kitchen table making lists: job possibilities, school programs, childcare options, financial requirements. It was the first time since her parents' death that Sarah had felt safe enough to plan beyond immediate survival. "Marcus," she said as they finished their planning session, "what do you get out of this arrangement?" "Really?" He was quiet for a moment, considering how much honesty the question deserved. "Purpose, I guess. For 15 years, my job was protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. When I came home, I didn't know how to be useful anymore. This feels like the most important mission I've ever had." Sarah studied his face, seeing the sincerity behind the military language. "What if the mission succeeds? What if Emma and I get back on our feet and don't need you anymore? Then I'll know I did something that mattered," Marcus said simply. "And maybe by then, I'll have figured out what comes next." Outside, winter wind rattled the windows, but inside the small apartment, three people who had started as strangers were building something stronger than blood, more reliable than systems, more enduring than regulations. They were creating family by choice, held together by commitment rather than obligation, sustained by the radical decision to take care of each other despite uncertainty about the future. 6 months later, the apartment bore little resemblance to the sparse space Marcus had once occupied alone. Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator, colorful decorations brightened the walls, and the living room had been rearranged to accommodate both adult conversation areas and child play spaces. The transformation reflected more than aesthetic changes. It showed three people learning to build life together. Sarah had found work at a family resource center, providing support to parents navigating crisis situations. The job paid modestly, but offered excellent benefits and aligned perfectly with her values. More importantly, it represented hope rather than desperation. She was helping other families avoid the catastrophes that had nearly destroyed her own. Emma was thriving in daycare, making friends, and hitting developmental milestones that had been delayed during their period of instability. She still called Marcus Mr. Marcus, but the formal address had evolved into a term of endearment rather than distance. He was simply Mr. Marcus to her, as fundamental to her world as Mama, as reliable as morning cartoons. Marcus had made his own adjustments to civilian life. Regular therapy sessions had helped him process combat trauma and survivor's guilt. Having people depend on him provided the structure and purpose he'd been missing since military service. He'd even started taking community college courses, exploring the possibility of becoming a counselor himself. But success brought its own complications. Helen Santos's 6-month evaluation was approaching, and everyone knew it would determine whether their arrangement could continue or whether bureaucratic realities would force changes none of them wanted. The evaluation is mostly a formality at this point, Helen assured them during a preliminary meeting. Emma is healthy, happy, hitting all her developmental markers. Sarah has stable employment and is making progress toward her educational goals. The living situation is clearly working. But, Sarah prompted, recognizing bureaucratic hedging. But the initial emergency authorization is expiring. To continue this arrangement, we need to formalize it through proper channels. That means home studies, background checks, court filings. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. What kind of court filings? Temporary guardianship documentation. Sarah would retain full parental rights, but you need legal standing to make emergency decisions, handle school enrollment, things like that. The word guardianship hung heavy in the room. It represented commitment beyond anything they'd previously discussed, legal entanglement that couldn't be casually undone. What if we don't formalize it? Sarah asked. Then this arrangement ends, and we explore other options for ongoing support. Emma, who had been coloring quietly at the kitchen table, looked up. What does that mean? Are we moving again? The adults exchanged glances, realizing their conversation was creating anxiety for the person it was supposed to protect. We're just talking about paperwork, sweetheart, Sarah said carefully. Nothing is changing right now. But Emma had learned to read adult moods with the survival instincts of a child who'd experienced instability. Mr. Marcus, are you still going to live with us? Marcus knelt down to her eye level. I want to keep living with you and your mama. We're trying to figure out the best way to make that happen. Good, Emma said with 3-year-old definitiveness. Because I like our family the way it is. After Helen Santos left, Marcus and Sarah found themselves facing a conversation they'd been avoiding for months. What exactly were they to each other? What kind of future were they building? How much commitment were they prepared to make? Marcus, Sarah said carefully, I need you to know that you don't owe us anything. You've already done more than anyone could expect. If the legal complications feel like too much... Stop, Marcus interrupted gently. That's not what I'm worried about. Then, what are you worried about? Marcus looked around the apartment that had become home, listening to Emma's humming from the kitchen where she continued her artwork. I'm worried that I care about you both more than is smart for a temporary arrangement. I'm worried that if something happens to this family I've accidentally created, it'll destroy me. The honesty in his voice made Sarah's chest tight. And I'm worried that you're staying out of obligation instead of choice. That you feel trapped by circumstances and kindness. They were dancing around bigger questions about love, commitment, the difference between chosen family and convenient arrangement. Both had reasons to fear emotional vulnerability. Both had histories that made trust complicated. What do you want, Sarah? Really want, not what seems practical or safe. Sarah took a deep breath. I want Emma to have a father who chooses to love her every day. I want to wake up next to someone who knows my worst moments and still thinks I'm worth fighting for. I want to build something permanent with someone who understands what it means to protect people. And what do you want with me specifically? Everything, Sarah admitted. I want everything with you, which terrifies me because I've never been able to keep the things I love. Marcus moved closer, taking her hands. I've been in love with you for months. With both of you. But I didn't know how to say it without making everything more complicated. How is it more complicated? Because now it's not about temporary housing or emergency assistance. Now, it's about choosing to be a family because we want to be, not because circumstances forced us together. Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by the intensity of their conversation. Are you talking about mushy stuff? she asked with the disdain of someone who found adult emotions both fascinating and embarrassing. Sarah laughed, the tension breaking. A little bit of mushy stuff. Are you going to get married like people on TV? The directness of the question caught both adults off guard. Marriage hadn't been part of their conversation, but Emma's assumption forced them to consider possibilities they hadn't articulated. Maybe someday, Marcus said carefully. If that's what everyone wants. I want that, Emma announced. Can I be the flower girl? Ashley at daycare was a flower girl and got to wear a fancy dress and throw flowers. If we get married, you can definitely be the flower girl, Sarah promised. Over the following weeks, they moved through the legal requirements with careful optimism. Background checks, home studies, court appearances, all the bureaucratic elements that would transform their makeshift family into something officially recognized. The process revealed details about each other's histories they hadn't previously shared. Marcus learned about Sarah's childhood in foster care, her parents' tragic death, her struggles with depression after Emma's birth. Sarah learned about Marcus's deployment experiences, his survivor's guilt, his family's immigration history. Each revelation deepened their understanding rather than creating distance. They were both people who'd survived difficult circumstances, both fighters who'd learned to protect what mattered. The court hearing was surprisingly simple. Judge Patricia Martinez had seen enough contentious family cases to appreciate one where everyone involved wanted the same outcome. Mr. Rodriguez, she said, reviewing the paperwork, you understand that temporary guardianship creates legal obligations and responsibilities? Yes, Your Honor. I understand and accept those responsibilities. Ms. Mitchell, you're comfortable with this arrangement? You retain full parental rights, but Mr. Rodriguez would have authority to make emergency decisions regarding Emma's care? Yes, Your Honor. I trust Marcus completely with Emma's well-being. Judge Martinez looked at Emma, who was sitting between her mother and Marcus, coloring in a book and occasionally whispering questions. Emma, do you like living with Mr. Marcus? Emma looked up solemnly. Yes, he makes good pancakes and reads really funny voices for stories and teaches me how to be brave. How does he teach you to be brave? He says being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing good things even when you're scared. Judge Martinez smiled. It was the kind of wisdom that suggested healthy adult influence in a child's life. Motion approved. Temporary guardianship granted for 1 year, renewable upon review. The banging of the gavel felt both anticlimactic and momentous. They were officially a family now, recognized by law and society, bound by choice rather than just circumstance. That evening, they celebrated with ice cream and Emma's favorite movie. As Emma fell asleep on the couch between them, Sarah and Marcus talked quietly about their plans. I've been thinking about something, Marcus said. What would you say to making this place really ours? Not just your stuff in my apartment, but something we choose together. Like moving somewhere bigger, like buying something together. A real home where Emma can have her own room, where we can plant a garden, where we're not just surviving but building. Sarah felt the familiar flutter of hope mixed with fear. Permanent decisions still felt risky, even after months of stability. Are you sure? That's a big step. Marcus looked at Emma, peaceful and secure between them. Then, at Sarah, who'd become the center of his rebuilt world. I've never been more sure of anything. This isn't just about having somewhere to live. It's about creating the kind of home we all deserve from the beginning. 6 months later, they moved into a small house with a yard where Emma could play and a garden where Sarah could grow vegetables. Marcus had proposed on a quiet Sunday morning while Emma was building block towers in the living room, and Sarah had said yes through happy tears. The wedding was small, just Emma as flower girl, Marcus's sister Linda as matron of honor, Father Miguel officiating, and a handful of friends who'd become their chosen extended family. Helen Santos attended, representing the system that had brought them together, and learned to trust their unconventional solution. During the ceremony, Marcus's vows included promises to Emma as well as Sarah, commitments to be present for scraped knees and school plays, and teenage heartbreak to provide the kind of steady father presence she'd never had. Emma took her role seriously, carefully dropping flower petals and announcing to the small gathering, "Now Mr. Marcus is going to be my daddy officially." As they exchanged rings, Sarah realized they'd accomplished something extraordinary. They'd taken a moment of crisis and transformed it into foundation for permanent joy. They'd proven that families could be formed by choice and commitment rather than just blood and circumstance. Years later, when Emma was older and asked about how their family had come together, they would tell her about the Christmas Eve when a sick little girl needed help and a lonely veteran needed purpose, and how sometimes the most beautiful families were built by people who chose to save each other. But on their wedding day, surrounded by people who'd learned to love their unusual story, Marcus and Sarah simply held hands and marveled at how far they'd traveled from that snowy night outside the hospital, when two strangers had decided to trust each other with everything that mattered. Emma threw the remaining flower petals in the air during their first dance, laughing as they fell like snow around the family that had chosen to become permanent, bound by love rather than luck, sustained by commitment rather than convenience. Their final battle hadn't been fought with weapons or strategies. It had been won through the revolutionary act of refusing to face their struggles alone, through the radical decision to believe that broken people could help heal each other, through the simple recognition that sometimes the most important victories came not from conquering enemies, but from choosing to build something beautiful with the people who showed up when everything else fell apart.